mic, camera, action.
We're going to lose this case, Carly. There are no more points of law to argue here. I want to cop a plea. Maybe Buckley will cop us a second-degree murder, and we can get you just life in prison.
Chick, I can't do no life in prison. You gotta get me off. Now, if it's you on trial...
It's not me. We're not the same, Carly. The jury has to identify with the defendant. They see you, they see a yard worker. They see me, they see an attorney. I live in town, you live on the hill.
Well, you white and I'm black. CJ, you think just like them. That's why I picked you. You one of them, don't you see? Oh, you think you ain't because you eating clouds and you out there trying to get me off on TV talking about black and white. But fact is, you just like all the rest of them. When you look at me, you don't see a man. You see a black man.
All right. Welcome back to the Filmography, the show dedicated to watching every credited film from an actor's complete back catalogue, from past debut through to present day in chronological order. Each episode, I'm joined by an esteemed guest to watch and discuss the next entry from their focused filmography and consider how it ranks amidst their career and whether we can trace any typecasting trends or topic traits or theatrical tics. Today's guests are the hosts of This American Wife podcast, Tim and Amber. Today's film is Joel Schumacher's A Time to Kill from 1996. We watch, you listen, and hopefully watch along too. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Good evening.
Hi. We're so glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Well, this is a new collaboration, and I hope, the start of something which will continue.
It's going to be beautiful.
And I think, I'm so glad you reached out because you're coming to this particular movie with such fresh perspectives that, we're always looking for. And I think I love recording with all my frequent guests, but it's also nice to get people on who really have a connection to the material, and you two definitely do.
Yeah, from very different angles for both of us. So
yeah,
this makes it interesting even for us to talk about it together.
Yeah, I love Matthew McConaughey. It was funny, I was telling Tim this earlier. I just feel at home when I see him on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably because we're both from the same place. He's actually from Uvalde, which is down south, but he moved to Longview, Texas, which is in the Northeast. I think it was when he was like 10. So he grew up and went to school there. He actually went to school with my dad and his sister. So he's a old, Longview Lobos fan. He still calls in for the football games. He's a real down to earth guy. And I love that. It was interesting. I found some old film of him coming back to town for this premiere of this film. He came back and all the little Longview news stations were huddled around the movie theater right outside. And there was not really anybody in the parking lot because this was pretty new for him. This is his kind of big deal for him to come home as a celebrity. This was very fresh. And it was so cute to just see him talk about his hometown and come back as a celebrity and see all the same things we all knew. Yeah.
And I didn't grow up in the same school as Matthew McConaughey, but for me, it's the Grisham link on this particular one. So John Grisham's always been one of my favorite authors. since I was maybe a teenager. I've read a lot of Grisham books. Funnily enough, I don't think I'd read this one until recently, but I'd read the sequels, which is really odd and annoying. So for me, it was interesting just to go back to it as a fan of Grisham and to see how very interesting the adaptation is from the book to this film, and the ways that the casting and the changes that were made, how they reflect the era as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think we definitely got to talk about the time in which this appears to be set and compared to when the time it was written. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there, isn't it? I mean, Amber, I think it's great. I mean, obviously, for you to have grown up so close to, well, literally where he's from, you know, I couldn't have dreamt it when I picked McConaughey. So, as everyone knows, I segued from Statham to McConaughey. You know, I won't deny there's a secret desire in my heart that one day he will hear this and will offer to come on. I mean, I'm not sure I'd have a lot to say. I think I'd just be staring at the screen blankly, not knowing what to do with myself. But yeah, it's a really cool perspective. So that you know, we've since getting in touch, been listening to each other's podcasts and getting to know each other that way, and we've caught up as well via this wonderful medium of the internet. And I think, yeah, the perspectives you're both going to bring, because I'd never read a Grisham, Tim. It's something I hadn't done. I did want to read this before watching it.
Yeah.
But what I did by accident was get the abridged audiobook version. And it was only,
Well,
you're
not a bad
through.
way to do it. Yeah.
No. And I sort of started it and I was like, this feels quite truncated. It's jumping around a little bit. And then my brain slowly woke up and said, it's the abridged version. And yeah, I'm glad that you said that. I'm not normally an abridged audiobook listener. I would normally get the full thing. But then I'll be honest, when I finished listening, I looked at how long the actual book was. I thought, this will do. This and the movie will do.
I think this is a good time for me to make the confession that although I bought the book a fair few weeks ago, I've only got a quarter of the way through as well. But it's interesting that you went for the abridged audiobook, you know, whether by accident or by choice, because to me, the film is an abridged version as well. There is so much that's been taken out, characters, whole bits of the legal process. And I feel like you can see why it's been done for the film, yet it still seems to be a really faithful adaptation. So I think the essence of the book is still there, but some of the changes I think have been made not just for film purposes, but I think also for film star purposes. And I think that's really interesting when we consider where Matthew McConaughey is in the casting of this as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Grisham had a heavy hand in this, didn't he? Like, this is his first novel, right? And I think he'd been resistant to this being adapted, if I understand it correctly. And it's only because Schumacher did such a good job in his opinion on The Client that he was like, okay, well, if you get Joel Schumacher, go for it. Yeah. So, yeah, it's such a hard job, I think, adapting something successfully from a long form book. And this is what 500 pages, I think, or something, 580 pages or something.
It's somewhere in the region of that. Yeah, I think I'm only about 150 in.
Yeah, so a big book as well. I mean, my partner and I, Emma, we watched the latest Strike series over Christmas, which is based on the Robert Galbraith books. And that's like 1,000 pages, I think, the book. And they condensed that down into like a 4 episode. It takes a real skill, I think, doesn't it, to be able to do that. And as you say, maintain the essence.
Yeah. And I mean, Amber, you've not read the book yet, but...
No, I haven't, only because I would rather watch the film.
No? Okay.
But no, I like John Grisham. It's legal dramas kind of scare me a little bit. I'm afraid I'm not going to understand. I have to like write things down in order to understand different legal things. So I think that kind of has kept me from reading some of his books.
Yeah. Whereas I think maybe Grisham has been deliberate in his way of almost educating his readers. I mean, this was his first one. And there are elements of the legal system that I don't think I've ever seen put on film that are in the book. A whole chapter about how they convene a grand jury just to decide whether or not someone's going to be indicted or not. I've never seen that put in a film, and it's certainly not in this film. That's definitely skipped over. But I think Grisham wants to put all those details in because in this instance, it is semi-autobiographical. So he is trying to kind of show where he's coming from and maybe even assert his credentials, I think.
That's fascinating. He feels like the legal drama thriller version of like Tom Clancy.
Mm.
So again, I don't know if you've read Tom Clancy, but his stuff was all like super technical, isn't it? And it's kind of the truth behind that kind of spy world. I remember my dad was really into them, so I read a few as a teenager. And same as you were just saying, Amber, like trying to follow at times all this technical jargon. I had no idea what was going on. So he feels like he's in that kind of realm to me more than maybe some of these more populist writers. I mean, another person I read a lot of as a teenager and in my 20s was James Patterson.
Oh yeah, I love James Patterson.
Yeah, so but then that fast airport kind of thriller. You don't switch your brain off for such because you want to solve the case, don't you, as you go along? But it's not technical as such.
Yeah, and I think Joel Schumacher, he did a good job in who he chose because it's interesting. I watched an interview today with Matthew McConaughey about how he wanted this role, but Joel Schumacher was like, yeah, right. In your dreams, kid. Like, no. But the person that they had picked, because they were choosing between like Kevin Costner, Woody Harrelson, and Brad Pitt, I think were like some of the top picks. But he took it back to Grisham, and Grisham said, no, I don't want them. Like, you got to pick somebody else. Because it had to go through Grisham.
Yeah.
And so he called Matthew McConaughey back and was like, well, I mean, the studio, we can maybe convince them because we have Sandra Bullock, because she had just done While You Were Sleeping.
And she'd done Speed.
And Speed. So she was pretty big, A-list. So I think they said, okay, well, maybe she can carry the film. So maybe we can call you back. Yeah. And he got it. And so I'm really glad that he did.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? The billing of the movie. Sandra Bullock, Samuel L. Jackson, McConaughey, and then you get into the unfortunate now casting of Spacey and the kind of the secondary tier cast. But yeah, he's third, isn't he?
And I think this is something that I really noticed as well in the film. I love Oliver Platt. I mean, he's fantastic. And if anyone wants to see him as a lawyer again, go to The West Wing. He's incredible. But it's almost like he's given like this sidekick role, which is not in the book in the same way. Harry Rex is in the books. He's a character that comes back, but he's a friend who pops in here and there. But right from the start, right from when we're introduced to Matthew McConaughey's character of Jake, he's right there alongside him. He's making all the jokes. And it's almost like the studio decided, okay, we're going to give it to this new guy, but we're also going to give you someone familiar alongside to prop you up, which is a bit of a shame. Because I also think they did the exact opposite with other more established characters and actors, as if to say, well, we know you can do this and we want to give you a bigger, more juicy role. So I think their confidence in him was not complete.
No, I think that's fair, isn't it? And, having now done this process of watching his first few movies, I can kind of see why. I mean, the screen time here is almost every scene, isn't it? Maybe I should do the maths of this at some point. The amount of screen time he's had up until this point in all these different movies can't be anywhere near just what he's in this movie alone. So it really is that big break moment, isn't it?
Yeah. But do you think that he'd proven that he could carry it in any of those earlier roles?
Probably, because he just has that. I think the only way I can describe it is a kind of laconic charm. He has that kind of laid back, easygoing vibe, doesn't he? But everything he does is kind of charming. And that's the feel I get of Jake, is that he kind of manages to charm everybody that he's around. And certainly in this movie, like the charisma McConaughey has with everybody is off the charts in this movie. But the character, I think, there is definitely a good fit, isn't it?
I think it's an incredible fit from reading the book. I think you couldn't almost ask for a better fit. But I can also see why they might have wanted a bigger name. But now that we've seen it, let's go. We'll go. I'm sure we'll go into seeing quite why he's so good in this role. But that charm, I think, is key. And the fact that he can be a little romantic, the fact he can be a little funny, very confidence building as well in the characters around him. I think that's very important for this character.
Amber, you mentioned Woody Harrelson because that's such an interesting one, isn't it? Because he obviously has become a very close friend, and I've read somewhere that potentially they might even be related, Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey. I don't know if you guys have read and heard this rumor too, that Woody
Right.
Harrelson's dad and Matthew McConaughey's mum were very close at a time when their parents were
Oh, yeah, that-
separated.
Oh yeah. Did you know that
Mm.
they divorced and got married 3 times?
Mm.
His parents? So I'm sure stuff happened. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't confirm or deny any of these rumors, but
I mean, you're just down the road, my love.
yeah, I
Yeah,
wouldn't
yeah.
put it past them.
Yeah. Tell us what life was like in Texas at that point.
Yeah, it's funny that you guys talk about the charm because weirdly enough, to this little town in Texas, Longview, I feel like the men in my family are very similar to the way that Matthew McConaughey is portrayed and the charm that he has. A lot of them have that and I don't know if it's from like a Texas small town. You have to kind of be bigger than your britches are. But yeah, it's such a specific charm that Texan men bring. And he does that in almost every role after this. Like, I think this is just something he's carried on. So, yeah, it's just so interesting seeing someone from this town make it so big, but just still be himself. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, we touched upon that, didn't we, when we spoke last week? This idea of how, as a person, he seems quite unchanged by the experience. He's still a family man at heart, and as you said, still goes to all the football games and is in with the crowd. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm sure money and fame changes you to an extent, but he seems pretty grounded, doesn't he?
Yeah. I mean, and he visits the local places that he used to go to when he was in Longview. When he comes back, because he comes back every once in a while, because he lives in Texas now, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, he'll just pop into the local pizza parlor. Like, it's just, I don't know, he is very down to earth, and that never really left him. And I think that is part of what makes him perfect for this role specifically, because that's what they needed. Somebody that was very comfortable in the South of the states. And that's not something you can put that on as a mask, I'm sure, as an actor, but it's something a little different when it's your whole being, I think, with Matthew.
And this story does also, in part, revolve around this idea of in the South. We do this in the South. This is what it's like in the South. We don't trust people from not in the South. And so if they'd cast an actor who wasn't from a Southern state, I don't know that it would have been as convincing. I think you're absolutely right that his charm is something that sure, an actor can put it on, but to an American audience, it would never have been convincing otherwise.
Yeah, I definitely think that's true. Can I talk about a little bit about like what went on in the South?
Yeah, please. And also, I think for me, hearing this is sparking something off in my head, which I hadn't thought of until this conversation. So if you can dovetail this in, I'd appreciate that as well. The idea of, Texas and Mississippi, like, where are they geographically? I'm not great on my American states. And like, how similar do you think that kind of would be as well?
Yeah. So Mississippi's not too far from Texas. So Northeast Texas, Longview, where Matthew and I are from, it takes, I want to say like maybe 10 hours, anywhere from 8 to 10 hours straight across to the east to get to Mississippi.
But in Texan terms, that's not far.
Right, yeah. Pop into the shop.
For us Brits, that's like going from Land's End to John O'Groats. But to Texans, that's really close.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, like you could do that in a weekend. That'll be a fun weekend away. Yeah, it's interesting too, because Mississippi and Texas were also some of the first ones to separate from the Union of the states during the Civil War, all of that. I'm not going to go into a huge, big history thing because I don't know if that bores people or not, but it's interesting that Mississippi, all of those southern states went through this huge period of segregation, and that was in the 50s and 60s. I don't know how that really compares to like British culture.
It doesn't.
You guys, like I don't know if you'll ever experience that.
No.
Like we had a huge separation, and it only ended, desegregation in Mississippi ended in 1970. So 15 years later, this movie is set. This is still like super fresh. on everybody's minds. And that is like something that I don't think a lot of cultures understand, how tough that is and how rooted it is in the American culture, sadly, in the South.
Mm.
And it was interesting. I saw too the Civil Rights Museum. They have one in Mississippi, and it took them 40 years to get it because
Oh,
people
wow.
just didn't want people to know. You don't want
Mhm.
people knowing your history, especially if you're part of the bad guys.
Mm.
So it didn't get opened until December of 2017.
Wow. Okay.
So
So please don't think that's boring. That's fascinating. Keep going.
yeah, it's just like I don't know that people from around the world still understand how close this hits sometimes. So
Mhm.
I think Tim asked me earlier if this was a film that aged well, and I'm going to say yes, because this is still very relevant.
Mhm.
I was looking too at the Ku Klux Klan. That's a big part of the film. And I was reading this other review of a guy. His name is, what's his name? Austin Vashaw. And he was going through different films with jury scenes, and because he just went to jury duty, so he was kind of comparing. And this was one of the films he brought up, and he said it felt kind of silly, like, oh, the rioting in the street, that doesn't happen. But actually, if you look on the state website of Mississippi, the Ku Klux Klan was resurging at that exact time, 70s to 80s, right after the desegregation. Oh, they were on it. So this is true. I mean, I know that in the book, you talked about how this book was, the whites and the blacks were very peaceful.
I mean, it seems to suggest, especially with Jake, he doesn't mind who he hangs out with, who he eats lunch with. And the film definitely makes a point of that and says it explicitly. Whereas the book, it says, he went to lunch at Claude's, I think it's called, and he ate on those days, and he didn't mind that it was this and that. But I think the film's trying to suggest that this is a very peaceful, racially integrated town, but it shows that the deep-seated problems are still there. And I think, didn't you find out it was like even till 2014, they still had to admit
KKKs are still around.
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? They're still
Yes.
active. KKK there's 3 organizations that are active as far up to 2014. That's 10 years ago. It's not over. Like, it just blows my mind that. So when I watched this film, that hit so hard with the history that I learned as a kid, because sadly American history isn't, I mean, history that is taught in American schools is not amazingly,
it's not world history.
integrated with the world. It's more
Or
just about
your own culture, maybe, even from what you're talking about. It's white power. Well, that's not quite. I mean, because we're talking about KKK, but it's white history, right? That's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so difficult to explain, and maybe that's why, because people need to understand that this is not an old topic. This is not something that happened thousands of years ago, and we still need to talk about it because it's could happen again. It's still happening, so maybe that's why they focus so much on this kind of history.
And I think there's another point interesting about the setting of the film. Now, the books are set in a fictional county and in a fictional town. The town is called Clanton in the books, but it was filmed in a place called Canton, just taking away that L. But then when I watched the film again, I watched it again today, I could swear that they don't say Clanton, they say Canton. So it's almost like the books were in a fictional area that Grisham gave himself a little bit of distance from things, saying this is fictional. But the film, it's almost like he said, no, I want this to apply to real world events. I want this to be genuinely set in a particular place in Mississippi. And I'm sure Grisham based it on this actual town, because boy, if that town does not look exactly like the book describes. But it does seem to be that he wanted to make it not a fictionalized tale, but really one that does speak to real American issues.
It's fascinating because one of my big questions I wanted to ask for us to talk about, and we've sort of done it really, was does this matter? Does this feel like it's set in 1984? I don't think when I watched it, I really thought about it. It's only kind of reading about it afterwards. But from what you're saying, Amber, yeah, it really does matter because of its proximity to these changes and to segregation. And yeah, I think the film handles that well in that it clearly shows there's still a divide in where people live in this town. And then it gets verbalized, doesn't it, later on when Samuel L. Jackson, Haley talks about the idea of like, well, you wouldn't come to our, he doesn't say this, but like to our wrong side of the tracks for our barbecue, you wouldn't let your daughter play with mine. And that obviously is still probably very, very true in 1984.
Yeah, definitely. It's so interesting too. We were looking at, there's a quote in the movie that he is kind of explaining the population of black versus white. Like that town is 26 to 36% black, and they would need an all-white jury to win, basically.
No, they would lose. They'll lose if there's an all-white jury and the DA wants an all-white jury to win. Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting because the town that Matthew McConaughey comes from in real life is the same population. It's the same correlation. It's about 25% black and then white. Anyways, it just continues to show me, the more I look up information about it, it shows me why he was perfect for this role, because he understood, especially hearing this in his school curriculum, he got this. He understood exactly where we're at in time. He knew.
It's fascinating as well, considering Lone Star, his movie that came out the same year, has a very pointed scene in a school with a like Latino Mexican like heritage teacher talking, saying we've got to update the curriculum. We've got to show that this town is not just white town. And of course, you've got the white corner going, no, we get to say what's going to go in the lessons or what's in the history books. So whether it's in the zeitgeist at this point or whether it's a conscious choice McConaughey's made, I don't know. But that's fascinating that these two have come right together in the same year of release.
Yeah, that's so true. It's just it's fascinating. And I think it's, absolutely still relevant. And I love it.
I love the TV series Friday Night Lights. I don't know if either of you ever watched it.
Oh, yeah. I watched a little bit. I mean, I wasn't as big of a fan of it as a lot of everyone in my school was.
Yeah. But even that set contemporary, that still had a big part of its later season's plotline about the idea of East Dillon and West Dillon, and how West Dillon is white and has lots of money, and East Dillon is black and is poor. And that's when the show got really good, if I'm honest. But I mean, that was a contemporary show, 12 years ago, 15 years ago. So as you said, right up to 2017, right up to these kind of modern times, it's still really relevant, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people in the world are so far removed from that, they don't really, because it's just not affecting them anymore. That was an old time. Like that was back in the 1700s. We don't deal with that anymore. But it's very real for America because that's where they all came to. So that is still a very big deal.
And I think for us as outsiders that, didn't grow up in the US, this is what we've seen presented to us in films and TV. And it's really interesting when Amber and I have these conversations about, is this real? Is this true? Is this what it's really like? And then now that I've been to Texas a number of times and I see, towns just like this town, and I see, areas of, low economic abilities. And, I've been not just in Texas, but also in California as well when I've been on holiday. And you go, okay, a lot of this is real. This is true. People are really presenting something. And, us as an international audience maybe don't realize how resonant that is. But for a US audience, maybe they're picking up on nuances and realities that we just say, oh, it's fictional, and this film, watching it now in my 30s, when I watched it, maybe in my 20s or earlier, maybe. And now with my experience of life of going to the US a lot, it kind of hit me very differently as well. But I can really believe that this is what it was like in that era, and maybe could even be like that again if the wrong kind of people walk onto the streets.
Mm. I mean, that might talk to why this was such a big success, right? I mean, absolute smash, and the kind of repeat success, which means people are going back and seeing it. They're seeing themselves reflected. Maybe they're seeing what they see as a truth that maybe isn't being, 96. So what else is coming out? Is that Independence Day year? Maybe is that 94? But we're at these kind of blockbuster era, aren't we? So it's walking to that kind of competition where, as you said, we had Speed, and it's doing something very different, and I think probably that drew people in.
Yeah.
I wish I was old enough at this point to have gone and seen it when it was big. I was only a baby, so I wasn't really versed in it. But
Don't rub that in.
Yeah.
I was old enough to go and see this.
Sorry.
But I think that's an interesting thing, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, but if this was released now, and I don't think it could be done in the same form, I think it would go through. It would have to have a black director. It would have to have a black writer for the adaptation. And if it was done again now, would they pick the same cast? I think so. But you'd also have the fact that Grisham then wrote another 2 novels set with the same characters. In fact, there were more with similar characters and in the same area. And you'd be talking with this success about a sequel. There would be no question.
Yeah.
But that never happened. No one said, "Oh, would you write another book with this character?" Because everybody loves Matthew McConaughey playing him. But I can't imagine that. Well, I've certainly not heard of anyone saying that they've asked him to reprise the role for the sequels being adapted. No one's talked about doing that. But surely, if this was coming out now or in the last decade, they would have done, because that's a massive success. It made 160 million in worldwide?
152 I read.
Yeah. And in the US, most of that was in the US.
Yeah.
On a 40 million budget. That's a real success still.
Yeah. I mean, particularly when you think about, it's interesting hearing him talk about this and its success. He sort of acknowledges, okay, 152 doesn't sound like big money nowadays, but back then in 96, that was massive. Like, this was an absolute monster hit, and particularly for the type of film that it is. I think that's got to be acknowledged too, the genre that it's coming from and the audience that it's drawing in. Yeah.
Well, Clint Eastwood would kill for that to have happened in Europe too. They sidelined that as a small release in the US, thinking it wouldn't make money, and then put it straight to streaming. Well, that's a massive critical success. And it's got to be noted that they've now started talking about going back to Grisham, because they're going to do an adaptation of The Partner with Tom Holland. And I mean, that's incredible, because The Partner is a phenomenal book. But maybe people now are realizing that there is some money to be made in this genre. But I feel like at the time they were making loads of them.
Oh, the 90s was, you couldn't move, could you, for a courtroom?
And a lot of them were Grisham's. So he was in the zeitgeist. He was the flavor of the month at the time.
Yeah.
But it's just funny that nobody really talks about this film much now, unless you're talking about Matthew McConaughey's career.
How do you think this stacks up against other Grisham? So before this, we had The Firm and The Pelican Brief and The Client.
Yeah. Oh, they were so good.
And then, of course, I've done my research. Then there's The Chamber, The Rainmaker, The Gingerbread Man, Runaway Jury. And then I think that's perhaps where the kind of courtroom stuff stops, because Mickey, I don't know, and Christmas with the Cranks certainly is not a courtroom drama. But that's a heavy run, isn't it? So that's in 10 years. So what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 movies in 10 years. 9 movies in 10 years.
And some of them with the biggest stars.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at
Tom
The Rainmaker.
Cruise, Julia Roberts,
Yeah. Pelican Brief is incredible. Rainmaker is a bit of a, what would I call it? Guilty pleasure for me, I think.
Is that Matt Damon, that one?
Yeah. And it's a bit quaint and a bit twee, but actually it's really enjoyable. So, you can kind of see that this stuff, it was popular in this era. And actually, I think this one's got to stand up above a lot of them because of the depth of the issues at hand. And I know it's been criticized by many since and said, didn't the Razzies award it the worst writing of the year or something like that,
I
or
think
nominated
got a
it?
nomination for best adapted screenplay. I think, yeah.
Yeah, or worst adapted screenplay as they like to consider it. But actually, the NAACP gave it an award of the year because they thought it was fantastic. So maybe to some audiences, to some critics, to some who actually know something, this is a bit of a success. And I think, like I say, we've watched it just the last couple of weeks, and I thought it, handled things quite well. But maybe as a white British man, I don't really know.
I'm really worried about covering Amistad. I've got to be honest. That's going to be an interesting one for me to cover. Yeah, I'll do my best, but yeah, that's fascinating.
Just talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's still relevant history for all of us, and it's important that we all know it. But yeah, I'll tread lightly in any kind of commentary that I try to make there, other than saying, yes, I am one of the not me, but yes, I'm from bad guy stock, unfortunately.
Yeah. And it's interesting. We were talking about that too, that the way that they wrote this and the way that McConaughey thinks of himself at the beginning of the film, he thinks he's one of the good guys.
Yeah.
And he has to be kind of known that that's not true. Samuel L. Jackson kind of points out, no, you're one of the bad guys. You're just helping me.
I'm using you to win, really.
Yeah, to help them see. And it's so interesting because we see at the beginning of the film where they show like a clip of a TV interview that he did, and he's like showing his family, like, look what I did. And the quote from that little interview, he says, I intend to show the good men and women of the South, the new South, regardless of color, that justice is and will be colorblind. And it is so funny to see that line just like explode throughout the whole film, because it does not work like he wants it to. That is his dream, and it's a lovely dream, but it is just not working out.
Yeah.
Good intentions, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the same with Grisham, and Grisham is white. And, the whole white savior kind of issue. Can he write a black character as the hero? In this case, he's trying to be semi-autobiographical. He's got Matthew McConaughey playing him, who, has this charm and everything that really applies very well to this character. But right now, if you release this again, people are going to shoot it straight down and say, yeah, but he's white and he's a savior. But actually, I think the film kind of tries to cover its back in that way of saying, Carly Haley says, no, I had to pick you because you're my best chance at getting justice the way I think I need it to be. Although the point is made that justice would be served either way. So it's a really difficult situation. And I can't imagine how it would play out in a real life courtroom if this was a real life case. But I appreciate that the film tries to ground it in reality, even though it knows it's from a fictional book set in a fictional town.
Yeah, the moral quandary at the core is really quite difficult to navigate. Even now, I don't really know if I have a strong opinion. It's a really interesting position that we're put in as viewers, as readers of the book. And obviously it caused controversy when it came out as a movie and went around the world. I don't know if you've read about in France that they insisted that it had a question mark put on the title, and there were quite a lot of vehement anti reviews to the film, saying the stance it takes is incorrect. I mean,
I think they even considered it deplorable.
Right? Yeah.
Would, suggest that the what's it called, the death penalty be talked about in such a way. But I think this is the point: is that it was a massive success in the US where people got it, whereas maybe other countries, we all bring something to any film we watch, and what we're bringing to it, from our own lived experience or our knowledge or our understanding of a situation, is going to change it anywhere and in any era. So, I'm older than the film and I see it in one way, but maybe someone younger watching it now for the first time is going to go, you can't make a film like this. So, sure, I think it's quite a successful adaptation. certainly from the point of view of someone who likes these books. But is it right? I don't know. But there's got to be a reason why they're not making it again.
Well,
Yeah, it's so interesting because a lot of, I think, the backlash that the people got when they were trying to have this civil rights museum put in Mississippi, it's because it showcased stories exactly like this. Like it was telling the truth behind all this happened. Like this is of course, a fictional story, I'm assuming, but it's very rooted in very real things that happened back then. They show the grocery stores where these kind of events took place. They show the white people that did horrible things to these black people and the moms that suffered because of it. Like it's just, they did not want people to see that. And that is why it took so long for them to get that put up. And I'm so glad that they do, because I think they need to understand that this is a very real history to Americans of the South, particularly.
And people who are still alive remember it from their childhood.
Yeah.
So there are people walking around today that you could, go up to and chat to, for whom these fears were real in their youth.
Yeah. It's just
how
sad.
did you? Sorry. It's sad. I agree. Yeah. No, as we're on this topic, I was wondering how you both felt about how Schumacher chose to show the awful event at the beginning of this movie. Do you think the way it was depicted was tasteful? Was it too much, not enough? Like, where did you fall on that?
I'm going to say I really appreciated the way they did it. I think that he did a good job of showing the severity of it, but not being too graphic. Because that's a hard line to I'm sure they could go more graphic, but I think it crosses a line in a woman's heart. Does that make sense?
I can imagine.
I don't know that I could have watched it.
I found it fascinating watching the editing, because I come from an editing background as well. And the way that Jake is introduced, Jake and Harry Rex are introduced in the midst of the initial crimes being committed. And their opening scene breaks it up. We don't have that same consideration in the book. The language used is horrific. The N-word is used liberally throughout that chapter. The depiction and the detail of it is rightly so shocking. It is a shocking crime. It shocks the whole town. But in the film, if you open a film like that and you give us a 10-minute scene of these horrible crimes being committed, people are going to walk straight out. I have a friend once who went to the cinema with me to see Slumdog Millionaire, and it started with someone being beaten up. And she looked at me and she went, "This isn't for me," and just walked out the cinema. And I remember, that's always changed my kind of perception of how a film starts, because I stayed, and I wouldn't have wandered out. But I can imagine if I'd gone to see this film and it had been in the same way that the book is, I found reading that first chapter awful. So if I had to watch it on screen, I think I would have given up. So I understand why they did it, but at the same time, it does kind of undercut, deliberately so, understandably so, it does undercut the impact of the initial crimes a little bit.
It's interesting. I don't know. That's why I wanted to ask you both how you felt. I think the choice to put us point of view, so we are almost having it done to us at times, because we're seeing the faces looming over the camera, aren't we?
Yeah.
I think that was a wise choice. I think I'd rather that than see that act being done. And obviously you couldn't ask a young actress to go through that. I'm sure that was taken into consideration as well. But I think putting us in that position really helps you to understand how victimized she must have felt in that moment. And then I thought the quick cutaways were fascinating, as you said, like not just away from the scene, but when we kind of see her feet being, or like her shoe coming off and like her feet as she's being hung, because then we're starting to toy with perspectives. It's not all POV. Like if it stayed all POV, now we're starting to see it. It is almost like she's coming in and out of consciousness, but we've now gone back to third person. So it's really like throwing us all over the place. I felt really unsettled, if not perhaps, as you said, revolted. And maybe, and I understand why, but I think, it's difficult, isn't it? Such a fine line to walk, people have their own views on Tarantino and what he does and things like Django Unchained, and he pushes it to a different level deliberately because he thinks he's got something to say. That certainly wouldn't work here, but yeah, it's a tough way to start a movie for sure.
It is. It's very powerful though.
And you come back to it obviously in the court, in the closing arguments.
Yeah.
So I don't want to jump forward too much, but
no, that's
we relive this opening scene,
mm-hmm.
and we don't break away, and that's kind of key. Then that we know what happened. We see enough of what happened to know what happened, and there's never any doubt about who's committed the crimes. Same in the book. There's never a doubt, and they're guilty of sin, and they deserve to be incarcerated at minimum.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the trial, when we have the closing argument, we have someone else from a white perspective, describing the crime in full detail, saying, close your eyes, picture it, and how horrific it is. So I think that's why the start actually still does work, that it doesn't then for the rest of the story ignore those things. At every point, we got Jake trying to bring it back into evidence in court. He's determined that it's not forgotten. You have Carly Haley again and again saying, look, this is why I did it, and I don't regret my actions. So I don't think the film takes away from the power of how horrific these crimes are, but it does make it palatable enough for us to sit through it.
And that's a nice word, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's got to be done, and well done to Schumacher for finding a way to do that as well.
Fascinating as well. Sorry, Amber, I know you've got something to say, but just whilst we're on Schumacher, then fascinating considering where this film falls in his filmography as well. Between
two Batman,
the two most outlandish, ridiculous, over the top, flamboyant, extravagant Batman movies you can imagine, and he's got this really well handled, as you said, nuanced, serious, mature. It really does show the range that he's got himself as a filmmaker.
But you wonder whether maybe those films before and after, how he was able to handle these heavy, legal dramas. You sometimes look at someone like Spielberg, who will often do a one for them, one for me. He'll do one that makes lots of money as a blockbuster, and then he'll do something that gets lots of Oscars, but makes not enough money. And I think maybe Schumacher was trying to do a similar thing, trying to follow in those footsteps. And he never reached those levels. But, doing a Batman film that was, like you say, outlandish, and then going to this very real legal drama set in this town that they made it more real than the original book, and then going back to Batman. Maybe he needed it. Maybe he needed a Batman as a palate cleanser.
Yeah,
he was having fun with that one.
As long as he was, somebody had to.
Yeah, what I wanted to say was kind of off topic now, but I just was thinking too. We see them coming back from a hearing for their a bond hearing. Is that what you said?
That's when they get shot.
When they get shot, is they're coming back from a bond hearing. Well, that is they were going to make bail, I guess is maybe what because this was I don't know. I don't know unless in the book.
In the book, I think it tries to suggest the bail is set really high and they shouldn't be able to. But the idea that they could be let out on the street is what prompts his actions. Yeah.
Well, this is the thing, is that if you're in this history of the South, you've had now decades of proof that they were just let right back out. They were put on bail like nothing happened. So you can I think that is another powerful point of this film, why maybe it did really well the way that it did, because you were talking about some people were wondering if there should be a question mark behind a time to kill.
The French said there was.
But in fact, in the South, it felt very true. No, this is the time. Not that I feel that way. I just, it's, it was just so exactly right to the people of the South that saw decades and decades of this happening and no repercussions being had, this was the time to.
And that stance is clearly supported in the movie, isn't it? I mean, white fathers say it, the community certainly says it, and I think that the Chris Cooper character in his little Lone Star reunion with McConaughey, which is quite interesting. I think he's a very well written, a very clever character that Grisham's interjected into the story to be wounded, to have his career ended, or certainly he can't do his job the way he has done before.
Desk duty for the rest of his life.
Yeah, and for him to be on Carl Lee Haley's side, I think that's the pivotal moment, isn't it? That's the character which tells you, if you're not sure up until this point, okay, now I've got to start rooting for Haley.
Yeah. And I think that really helps as well, is that the courtroom scenes are so well handled. I don't think they're as melodramatic as you might have expected, or as grandstanding as you might have expected.
I only thought the one moment was Spacey's character going at Samuel L. Jackson, going at Carl Lee Haley. I thought that was the only time when it felt a little bit unrealistic.
But I do wonder whether, watching it now in 2025, knowing what we know about Kevin Spacey, although he's been acquitted of many accusations, the fact that his reputation has been forever tarnished, and does that make us now even more so root against the DA?
Yeah,
because
definitely.
We're definitely on Jake's side all the way through, but at the same time, we've had this argument that justice will be served either way, and he will admit that he can understand why he did it. He has sympathy for the defendant, but the fact that it's Kevin Spacey, I don't know. I just I now can't see him, and
for him to be the guy going after somebody else for like wrongdoing and having poor morals, and you're 100% right.
I mean, and I say this as a man who oddly has Kevin Spacey's autograph on his wall right in front of his desk, because he signed a poster that I've got hung up on the wall. And when accusations were raised against him, I looked at that poster and thought, should I still have this poster up? And I do have it. He's only one of many people to sign it. But it just feels really strange now that, with kind of hindsight of that, does it make this DA character even more villainous when actually he's presented in the film as just doing his job quite well, and he's presented in the book as also doing his job quite well.
Yeah, he's a good counterpoint, isn't he? We're coming back to McConaughey. I think we've got that kind of southern charm of his character, and that is definitely vital for seeing him through the changes, being that kind of cocky character at the start and kind of being brought down to earth. You need to, as you said, Tim, be on that journey with him. You need to be supporting him the whole time, and that charm sells that. But the only word I can think of, and it's not quite right, but that the Spacey DA is kind of smarmy. He's kind of like, I can't think of a better word, but the way he's been depicted is that definite counterpoint, isn't it? You've got kind of the blonde, like charming, easygoing, and then you've got the kind of the slick, and he's got his own charm about what he does in a different way, but they're definite kind of yin and yangs, aren't they?
But even when he says, I'm going to find a way to discredit the psychological analysis and the psychiatrist that they bring in, well, Jake's side is doing exactly the same.
Yeah.
You can't argue that the two are doing anything different. They're just doing what's best for their client and doing what's best to win. But maybe you could even argue Jake's tactics are maybe even more underhanded in discrediting the psychiatrists. So, I wonder whether now it does take on a slightly different flavor because of the casting, but at the same time, excellent casting. So, I think he's right. He has the confidence. He has the, Spacey does hold himself well in a courtroom environment, in real life and in fiction. When you watch something like House of Cards and you see him as a president, you get it. You can get how people would be won over by this guy. So I think it's great casting. It's just so interesting to watch it again now, nearly 30 years later, where these characters where the actors playing these characters have changed for us. So
Yeah.
That's a funny aside, but there we go.
No, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And I know there's always that counter argument of that any great artist and musician and all this stuff, but it does alter your perception. Fincher is my favorite filmmaker, and I absolutely adore Seven, but it's hard to go back and watch that now, knowing the kind of character that he's playing and that again. And yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? And you can't help but bring your own. I guess we've already said this today as well. Tim, you said it earlier about bringing your own perspectives and prejudices and things to it that you hadn't before. And it certainly alters the way you see things, doesn't it?
Yeah. And the fact that too, I wonder if this also kind of plays into it, that the DA and the judge, they are not at all portrayed as being part of the Klan or anything like that. But it's interesting that in real history, some Klan members became governors and were district attorneys, and they were like sneakily kind of raising ranks, I guess, in the communities.
And we have that shown with one of the sheriffs, and the fact that he joins the Klan and that he's essentially working against his colleagues, against his neighbors. And thankfully justice is served on that in the end. It's not something that just the audience know, but I think that's a really interesting point, is that when you look at the history of these things in real life, there were people in positions of power. And so I think now if this film was to be remade, there would be a much more critical eye over all of these characters.
It would be such a tough movie to make. It would be so touchy. Like you'd have to be so careful about how you've done it. But for the time being, I think this movie definitely stands the test of time. It's definitely worth watching.
I think it's still held in quite good regard, isn't it? I think, people look back, and certainly McConaughey is very proud of it. And he met somebody who became important to him for a while. Sandra Bullock's in this, and they, as far as I understand it, I'm not great on my celebrity gossip and tittle tattle, but from what I read, it sounds like they enjoyed each other's company quite a lot for a while after making this movie together. What did you think of her in the role? And Tim, obviously, being a fan of the book, she comes in much, much earlier in the movie than she does in the book, doesn't she? So how do you think all of that's handled?
Well, I mean, I don't know how Amber's feelings are on her character. I think it's good, and I think it's important that there be more female perspectives in the film. But in the book, it's Carla, his wife, who is very prominent. She is his sounding board. She is very supportive, and the way it describes his romance with her is lovely. I mean, the introduction to Jake we get is that he will wake up in the morning earlier than his family, get ready to go, but that he will kiss his wife, and sometimes more than kiss his wife, before leaving for work. And it's really sweet. Now, in the film, what we're getting is this almost a love triangle that tries to hint at this temptation. And I think that's not great for Jake.
No, I agree.
This is one of those changes that I think is a change to make that role more juicy for an actor. It's to make it better for Sandra Bullock to sign on. I think they do the same with Carly Haley's role, that they knock out a couple of characters so that he gets more lines and a bigger role for Samuel L. Jackson. But I have nothing against the character. I think she's important. I think it's good. I just kind of wish it didn't come at the expense of Jake's loyalty to his wife, which is put a test. And, he's loyal in the end, but, you don't mess with a Southern woman when you're married to her. I know that.
That's a matter of experience, yep.
Yeah, so
it's so funny that you say that, babe, because I actually thought that in the movie. I thought there is no
you
way.
Got angry.
There is no way in hell I'm leaving while my husband is away at this picture. There's no way. I mean, I understand the safety aspect. I would go the next town over. Like, I'm not going that far. So that was kind of crazy to me that she left. And so I don't love that. Yeah, like y'all said, the love triangle kind of like they hinted at maybe, could they have an affair? I didn't love that.
Let's be honest about your reaction while watching the film the first time, though. You literally shouted at the screen.
Yeah. Well, because I was like, no, don't, no, you're gonna ruin a big, like, you have it so good with your wife and your daughter. Like, don't, they're working on this house together. Anyways, I thought it was kind of silly, and I agree. I think it probably was to just give Sandra Bullock a bigger role. But, besides that, I loved her character. I thought this character was great. It brought in some fresh perspective from someone from New York, very northern aspect. And it's so funny that she brings out the fact that her last name is Rourke, but in the South they split it to Roark. And it's so true. It's just cute. And I loved that they brought out a lot of the differences, because I think that was important too. The fact that she brought out, he thinks he's liberal for all of these people, but in reality, to someone who was, he's not. So I just thought that was interesting and cute. I loved her character. I thought she brought a really good, fresh perspective to the South. Like it gets a little, it's such a small town. Everybody knows everybody's business. Like it gets a little like everybody's family almost. So she brought in a nice breakup to that I liked.
And I think from a business point of view, they often call these the flyover states, that they underestimate these in box office terms. And they're represented in films quite often, but they're very underrepresented when it comes to promotion, essentially. So bringing in that New York idea, that character is key. I think that's to try and make it appeal to all the states, to the US. And it clearly worked. The box office plays that out. So I have nothing against her role being, grown as it is. But at the same time, does it slightly change our perception of the lead character? Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
No, I agree. I think the way that she challenges Jake is brilliant. I think you're right. That scene when they're talking about the death penalty and the differences there, and the fact that she brings something totally new to the team that he's pulled together, Rex and him. And what's Donald Sutherland's character called? Is it Luther or something? Lucian, thank you. Yeah. So he's sort of on the periphery, but when he comes in, she brings in a fresh element that none of them can bring. I think that's great. Yeah, I'm not a fan of that will they, won't they in this movie at all. It just doesn't work. I hear everything you're both saying. I just don't buy that as soon as his wife's out of town, suddenly he'd be interested in somebody else. He clearly is a family man. He loves his daughter. He loves his wife. I mean, mid-90s Sandra Bullock, I kind of get it. I mean, I'm a red-blooded man, I don't want to objectify her, but she is a beautiful woman and she's at her kind of peak here. So I kind of get the attraction, but I don't think he would ever act on that. And you're right, Tim. It's just been brought in for more for her to do, for it to be a classic will they, won't they.
Yeah.
It feels forced. It doesn't ever feel, I don't know if either of them really ever commit to it. It just sort of, the scenes when they're having to do those between them just feel kind of a bit rote, whereas the scenes when they're being feisty and having difference of opinion, they feel like they come alive then.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether maybe some of those scenes were the last bits they filmed. Maybe because Sandra Bullock only came in for a few days of filming. So, maybe they were all filmed together and some of those were kind of, will we put it in? Will it make the edit? Will it not? And I kind of wish some of those moments hadn't. You're right. That I like that the character is so smart. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't have won the case. He wouldn't have done as well as he does. She's thinking on other levels. She's got experience that he does not have in these particular kind of cases. And I think play up that. Don't play up the romantic element. But, you wonder whether, as you pointed out, he does have a lovely family man quality in the scenes with his wife and daughter that I think put him in good stead for later roles. It's why people could see him as a romantic lead, why people would make him a heartthrob. And he's wonderful in those things too. But this film didn't have to be that.
Yeah.
No.
I agree.
And for me, it really affects that scene when his wife comes back. When she comes back in and he's in the office and she comes in to support him. Something about that scene again, I just really didn't buy it because it felt like that scene felt forced because they had to have a reconciliation, but we never really saw them, other than the fact she had to leave for her safety and the safety of their daughter. We didn't really see them, breakup's not the right word, but they, we didn't see them being estranged, or we're just supposed to buy it because he's had a bit of a flirt and has said he wants to kiss Sandra Bullock. So yeah, that didn't feel like a truthful scene to me either. I don't know how you both felt.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Yeah, I didn't really. The fact that she had to tell him that she understood only now, like, that didn't make sense to me. Like, I feel like she would have understood that from the get-go. Why didn't she? Yeah, she was talking all about understanding that he.
It's like the third act kind of go get him, Tiger. It's like like Rocky 2, when Adrian's been in a coma after giving birth, and she comes out of the coma, and up until that point she doesn't want him to fight, but now go get him, Rocky.
Yeah,
and it doesn't fit here.
No, I agree with that. I didn't really flow for me either, but I just kind of ignored that.
Yeah,
and it's really interesting that in the book, and actually even in the subsequent books, the house plays such a big role, that she is very proud of their home. And she's put so much work into it. And I think pretty much every scene we see, she's doing some kind of work on the house. And that's in the books, that she's very proud of the work they put into their homes. But that's why I think you're right, that it's odd that she, A, leaves, and B, we need to know that she's losing a lot. That she loses, she keeps her husband and her child that she loves the most, but the next thing she loves beyond them is their house.
Yeah.
And so it's not, to him, it's like, it doesn't matter. He's got the nicest office in the world. He can go to his office, but she loves their house. So I almost feel like I wish that what they beefed up in the writing was her role, not Sandra Bullock's role. And Ashley Judd is great. She fits the role really well. And I just think she could have done with this being a star turn for her rather than it having to be one for Sandy B.
Yeah, there was a balance there to find. There was room for them both, wasn't there? I think, there's scenes where they both could have been in it, and I think that could have been a really interesting dynamic too. I agree. Ashley Judd is great, and she's somebody, I think, she was blowing up at this point herself. She'd been in Heat, and then she had Double Jeopardy, and this is that era before. I don't know how you both feel about swearing, but that tosspot got himself involved in her career and ruined it for her. Very famously, she was the first person to speak out against Weinstein, and celebrity voice to speak out and say what he did to her. I think she would have been her era's Margot Robbie. She was obviously beautiful, but behind that beauty was a real level of talent. And I think, she would have had a massive career. And you can see that here in this small role.
Yeah. I don't know if either of you have seen The Divine Secrets of the Yaya Sisterhood.
I have not.
So she was a major.
You did know, really, didn't you? I love how you delivered that, but really, you said, "Yeah, these two guys haven't seen it."
Well,
it sounds like our kind of movie.
I'm referencing Rocky, and you're right to pull that one out the bag. I love it.
Okay, so tell us about the Divine Sisters of the Yaya Sisterhood.
Okay, this is another. It's very set in the South. This is Ashley Judd. 2002 is when it came out. Excellent film. So if you guys separately will go and watch this movie.
I pledge right now to do that.
Yeah. That is the level of commitment I wanted from Carla, like what you were saying, because the depth of emotion that she puts forth in this Southern film as well. This is, I think, earlier times. She's
the setting.
Yeah, the setting is a little earlier in time, but it's still very in the South. She goes through her childhood, the way that her relationship with her mother was. It's an excellent film. I don't know why it's not talked about more, but it's also got Sandra Bullock, Ashley Judd, Maggie Smith, like loads of A-list characters. And maybe it's another like one of those only Southern people have watched it and loved it. But
so having seen that, bringing that to this, did that really warm you to her character then as the wife?
That was the first film I ever saw Ashley Judd in. And so I love her from that movie. Like she gave like the performance of a lifetime. my opinion. And the writing in that film was so excellent. So to see her to come to this little tiny, it felt like a tiny little role for her, but I wanted her to bring what I knew she could later bring.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk to me about how she is in the book, I'm thinking, oh yeah, she could have, if they had written her character a little bit more, she could have definitely brought a lot more to the table, because I love Ashley Judd. She's great.
Sadly, in this, I think she feels like an ancillary character where she should have been a supporting character. But it gives support to everyone else. So like I say, like Harry Rex goes from being an ancillary character to being a supporting character. And it's like, we don't need that in the same way. I think maybe the focus could have been.
But I think you're right. It was to do with who the names are, weren't they? Ashley Judd wasn't a big name at this point. She was starting to blow up, wasn't she? Whereas, yeah, you're right. Oliver Platt is already kind of a big name. He's already had these kind of sidekick comedy character roles, hadn't he? Been in Three Musketeers and plenty of other things, but he'd been sort of playing these kind of roles around this era too, hadn't he? So, yeah, I can see again why they've sort of reappropriated things and have passed them on to, I guess, the people that are bringing the money in terms of the budget and the advertising and the product placement, if that's here in this and stuff. So all of that, I guess, is coming along with these names, aren't they?
But I think bringing that into the way that it affects Matthew McConaughey's role here then, because, Jake should be by far the lead character. He should have this lovely role, and he has this ability to show he's a good family man. He's a very, very smart lawyer. He's charming and all the rest, but they give some of his charm to Harry Rex. They give some of his romance to another character. They give some of his brilliance to another character. And I just feel like maybe it was just taking a little bit away from the role, which is why this didn't get him the plaudits that you might have thought it would. So yeah, I just feel like it just sapped a little bit of the character's nuance and a little bit of the power of that character to give it to these other established actors, which is, it's fine. It's an amazing cast. The Sutherland's in there and everything.
Yeah.
What a fantastic ensemble. But at the same time, an ensemble sometimes means that you don't get a lead role that's going to get someone all the recognition they could have done with. And right here, what a breakthrough entrance to the movie scene for him. So, he could have come on with an Oscar straight away. It could have happened, but it didn't.
Yeah. I hadn't actually seen this before this time for this project. And the only other person I could really think of in terms of arriving fully formed as like, wow, this person is now a movie star in that way where like their character arc kind of mimics their actor trajectory, if you know what I mean. Like Jake is looking to be a star in the court and to move his career on, and McConaughey's looking to do that as a film star. The only other actor role I could think of that was similar would be Cruise as Maverick in Top Gun. In that movie, he is just like, if you've never seen him before, if you've seen him in something else, but suddenly you're like, oh my God, I understand why Tom Cruise became the biggest star in the world in Top Gun. He's so handsome and so charming, and Maverick should be a douchebag. You should hate him, but you don't, because of the way that Cruise plays it. And I think you don't hate Jake. I think Jake is a very likable character, but suddenly it's like there's this handsome guy with this brilliant smile and all the charm in the world. And yeah, like I said, just to repeat myself, like actor and character meet in this perfect kind of symbiosis of launching out into being stars within their stories and their lives.
Yeah. And Grisham could see that. That's why he made sure he was the one cast. He could see this is the guy for the role. But he was thinking about the role as it was originally written, maybe not thinking about the role as it's written for screen. And it doesn't mean that it's badly written for screen. It's kind of shocking to me that this is a wonderful lead dramatic role, but how long, in your project and in his filmography, are you going to have to go before he gets another lead dramatic role?
Yeah, that's really interesting. You're right. This should have been where he should have gone from this point. But you've already mentioned it, perhaps that kind of the romance angle here. People notice that. And as you said, the charm and the chemistry, perhaps he kind of got parlayed and pushed into that angle, because yeah, there's times in this movie, which is quite interesting when you think about the ending. To me, you've already touched upon it, and I think we do have to talk about that final kind of soliloquy speech that he gives. Maybe we can talk about how it holds up to Gregory Peck in Mockingbird as well. I don't know which one wins that battle of the closing speech soliloquies. But there's times in this when he really doesn't say very much. At times, Jake's quite an insular character, and you can see but McConaughey's performance allows you to see what he's thinking and what he's going through. So he does show the full range in this movie.
Yeah, I would call that last soliloquy a career-defining moment for him because he delivered that flawlessly with the emotion that was absolutely needed during that scene.
I think he's perfect with what's been written.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't got the script in front of me, but as far as we can tell what was written, what gets to screen, he does brilliantly. All the nuance, all these different emotions, this interesting character. I just still wonder why, you know, you say that's a career-defining scene, and it is, but it should have been even bigger. I just feel like that should have been a moment where you come out the cinema kind of gasping about that moment. And I do also wonder whether the upbeat ending of the family going over for barbecue, does that maybe change the tone? Because this point of, well, what if she was white? You know, that should linger.
It's a little bit Hollywood, isn't it? It's a little, yeah.
The film does let it linger for a minute. It gives you the reactions of the jury, and it takes a moment before announcing the verdict. But I mean, you want to leave the cinema with that lingering, really. That's the difference between a box office success and maybe an awards success.
That's true. I will say that too, though, I think McConaughey at this point in his career, it was small, right? Like he hadn't done very much. This was his first big one. So he had to play the game that Hollywood plays.
Worked with what he was given.
Worked with what he had, what was given to him. And he said he enjoyed his little rom-com phase, but he began to be very serious later on. Like, hey, actually, I'm done playing the Hollywood game. This is really what I want to do. And he moved to Texas to do that. He had to really show them how serious he was. Like, you know what? I'm going to leave. And you call me when you have something that I want.
Yeah,
but he couldn't do that at the beginning of his career. I mean, he's just a baby. So he's like, I'll take what you got.
and interestingly, even Samuel L. Jackson feels like he couldn't do that with this film. Because he said that he thought he would have been up for Oscars if everything he'd filmed had been in the final cut of the film. So maybe there was a lot more, and we just not got it all. Maybe the initial cut of this film was 3.5 hours, not 2.5 hours. At which point, maybe some of McConaughey's best acting was right here, and we just didn't get all of it. But he's still excellent. I mean, with what he's given, with what we're given in the final edit, he's fantastic, and I don't think you can fault his performance.
No, I agree with you. There's the moment, a couple of moments in that final speech where it could tip over to kind of too much or pantomime, or there's that kind of pregnant pause moment that is so hard to judge. And sometimes when I see it in movies and TV shows, my mind just goes straight to Joey in Friends when he's got the acting class and he's doing smell the fart acting. If I remember, it's been a while since I've watched all the Friends, but if I remember that correctly, and there's that sense of that he's been taught, like, if you can't remember your lines, pause, pretend you're smelling a fart, and then your line comes back and you move on. And there's almost a moment like that here in this soliloquy, but he just sort of, he just times it perfectly. There's just something about it. And it is really interesting looking at his filmography from here, because he has got weighty movies, Contact, Amistad. These are movies about stuff, but he's not the leading man. He's supporting here. And you're right, Tim. It's kind of, I'm scrolling. That was a deliberate dramatic pause, It's kind of Lincoln Lawyer, really. Another law movie, another lawyer character. That's 2011.
That's Timu version of Grisham, really, isn't it? It's
trying
to be, that's not even giving him quite the material he's got here.
No, I agree.
He could have made a bit of a career dent
Mm.
with just reprising this character
Yeah,
had the
yeah.
sequels already been written. Because if it was released right now, you'd say, oh, there are more stories with this character. Well, he's got to play it because he plays it so perfectly.
Mm.
So you can see why they wanted him back as a lawyer later on. But I mean, that's a very different lawyer in The Lincoln Lawyer. No offense to The Lincoln Lawyer, it's a perfectly good film, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it when you get to it. But it's not got half the charm that he's got in this one.
No, I agree. So you know, it really is a long time until he kind of gets back on this path. And yeah, Amber, that section in Green Lights in his biography, when he talks about like kind of drawing a line in the sand, like digging his heels in, and he was like, the scariest thing I've ever done, and it took years for that call to come, but was ultimately the right decision, because yeah, then suddenly you get Dallas Buyers Club, Wolf of Wall Street, True Detective, Interstellar, and you're like, whoa, okay, this is kind of who he always wanted to be, and this is the run he maybe should have had after this movie.
Yeah.
It's also who he was, though, not just who he wanted to be. Like
Mm-hmm.
the qualities are there in this film.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that was the right decision for him to do. I'm sure it was scary. I'm sure it was terrifying. But like I said, you can't make that big of a line in the sand when you're so early in your career in Hollywood. I don't think they would have respected him for it.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
And did his charm almost do him a disservice? Do you know, if you're so charming and so charismatic, again, you know, comparisons, I think of like, I don't know if you're Buffy fans. I grew up, I absolutely love Buffy, but James Masters, who plays Spike in that, doesn't matter who he's acting with in that show, there's chemistry. Timothy Oliphant in like Justified, whoever he's with in that show, crackling chemistry. And McConaughey's one of those people, like whoever he's with, he's clearly working hard, he's a professional, but they're having a good time with him. That kind of leads you into the charming roles, the comedic roles, the romantic roles. Perhaps it almost was, it almost was an Achilles heel for him, I suppose, in many ways.
It's that Texas charm that you talked about.
Yeah.
I think it's so true. Like, and I think he had fun with that, because that when he's young, because he was young. What was he, 26 or 28 in this film? When he shot this, I think he was in his 20s. So it's like, okay, you're late 20s, early 30s. You're fun and flirty. Like, he's having fun with these rom-com roles after this. But it's when you get into your mid 30s, I'm not there yet, but when you get to your mid 30s, I'm sure you want to be more serious, and you want to reflect on things, and you want to
preach. You're right.
Wait till in your mid 40s, Jesus, and you know, it's a real downhill slope from there. No, I mean, you're 69 he was born, so you're dead on. Like, and he's in that kind of 26, 27, depending when they're filming this, but yeah, sort of mid to late 20s. Yeah, I mean, what mid to late 20s burgeoning Hollywood actor doesn't want this success and this fame and acclaim, and and
to use his good looks and everything. I think it's interesting watching this film back that in the start of it, he looks very young. And I think he looks like he's aged when he's giving the closing argument. That he actually looks like this has taken a toll. And whether that's good makeup, probably, good lighting, probably, but it's also good acting. That he feels so youthful and optimistic and believing the best at the start. And this process has changed him. By the end, he's come close to dying a couple of times. And so McConaughey had this range. He had it early on, and he showed it. And I just feel it's a shame that no one fully took him up on the promise of that range in his, you know, the next few roles, because, you know, use his youth for those rather than just the romantic comedies. But I'm glad he gets back on track later on, because his skills have benefited so many wonderful roles ever since.
Okay, well, to be fair, as a woman, from a woman's perspective, I loved rom-com Matthew McConaughey. Sorry, babe.
It's all right. I wanted to be him. It's fine.
Yeah, no, he had a fun little time, and you could tell, and I enjoyed the chemistry he had with all these people. That was fun, but I really do appreciate these more serious roles. And you asked the question earlier, Jack, about the soliloquies at the end.
Oh yeah.
Finch versus Jake. I'm gonna put my vote in as Jake because he appealed to the heart. I
Nice.
know that Finch's was like iconic.
Gregory Peck
Yeah.
Yeah.
versus Matthew McConaughey. Ooh, that's juicy.
But in my honest opinion, I think the writing, I appreciate Jake appealing to the heart and the emotion of it. Whereas I feel like Finch relied more. Well, in fact, in the part of it, he says, I don't want you to review this with passion. In the name of God, do your duty. Believe him. So he was more duty based.
Yeah.
Whereas Jake's was like, seek the truth with your heart, not with your eyes or your mind.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose of the trial, Jake says throughout, I don't believe he's insane. I don't believe we can convince you he's insane. I'm just giving the jury a way to vote him not guilty. It's just to give them the option so that if they feel that way inclined, they have a legal route to take. So that's a fascinating kind of contrast between those two very famous courtroom scenes that obviously play with the racial aspects as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's very deliberate, isn't it, what Grisham's done in the book and then what they're recreating here. And I think they stand toe to toe. And I think what you've spoken about there, Amber, is fascinating. It's that sense of why are these people now in this position? Jake's very much is belief and passion, and he thinks he's doing the right thing, and he genuinely wants to defend Coley Haley and wants to get him off. There's partly that kind of selfish motivation because he himself feels guilt, doesn't he, about the fact that he didn't stop Coley. But also, as he says, if this was my daughter, I would have done the same thing. So that's really interesting. His all comes from that place. Whereas obviously, as wonderful as it is and celebrated as it is, Mockingbird in both the book and film version, as you spoke about earlier, Tim, that sense of like, as new generations come through and start picking holes and things and how culturally we've changed, and Atticus is very much a white man doing what is a white man's duty, still with a black maid in his house, and he's willing to defend this black man because he's supposed to, and he does take stands and he does put himself at risk and in danger, but he's not willing to change his ways. He's not going to go home and tell Capernia she can have a raise or get a new job or give her freedom, or so. Yeah, the stance of the two, I think, affects the power of the speech too, doesn't it?
And the film's written differently as well in that way, is that in A Time to Kill, in the book, Ozzy, the black sheriff, is told that Carly is thinking about doing this, and they both decide we're not acting on it. But in the film, a very, explicitly pointed out, you didn't go and tell him, you didn't bring him into this. Now, that's one of the biggest differences. And is that to maybe put that onus on Jake? Yeah. Is it to make it that he, as a white man, made this decision rather than consulting someone else who might have changed his mind? I don't know. I think the film definitely puts that across, which, maybe that aspect was more nuanced in the book. But that doesn't mean that the film doesn't do a good job, because the film presents us with this idea of, okay, he feels this maybe a level of regret, a level of responsibility for not flagging this, potential threat. And then, when you think of Atticus Finch, you do the same thing. You say, okay, is it about responsibility? Is this about reparations? Is this about, generational guilt? The film doesn't necessarily delve into that, but I don't think it also takes that away. I think those things are there, but maybe we overlook them because of other failings. But I don't think they should be overlooked. I think they're there.
No, it's interesting. So that got really serious, rightly so. I'm going to totally. No, it's great, but I'm going to totally swerve because I've got one big burning question left on my list of things I want to talk about today. I want you both to answer it from your own perspectives of, your background and your history, Amber, of where you've grown up and knowing about Mississippi and Texas, and Tim, of your knowledge of the book. Is it really that hot and sweaty in Mississippi? Because my God, these people are hot and sweaty.
They're glistening.
They are.
Absolutely. So let me explain. So it was so funny because when Tim and I were dating, he would fly over
Oh,
and he would get all dressed up nice,
Mhm.
like in a nice shirt, maybe a tie.
I always wear a leather jacket as well. It's my
He-
signature.
It's just like what he was trying to dress nice. And I just laughed at him every time because as soon as we stepped outside, he would just go, "Ugh, I have to take this off."
I mean, I grew up in the northeast of England, which is known for being cold, and we don't really wear coats.
Mhm.
But going to Texas, and I think the climate is comparable. Is that right? Is it fair to say that the
Oh,
climate?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's swampier in Mississippi, but yes.
Mhm.
And this humidity and this heat, you know, the hottest we ever get in the UK, we had to like close shops and stay in our homes, and there was an amber warning of
Mhm.
danger to life because it hit 40 degrees last year. Well, in Texas, it was doing that regularly.
That's 7 months out of the year it's in the 40s. So
We got married in December, and our honeymoon, it was still 25 degrees in Texas. And I get on a plane and I get stuck in Canada because of the snow, and I get stuck back in the UK because of snow. It's crazy. So these people glistening throughout this film,
Mhm.
that didn't give me a moment's pause at all.
Totally
I
accurate.
completely believe that.
Mhm.
yeah, it is hot.
Yeah.
Hot as hell.
Lots of I don't really know, kind of like cropped vest tops and lots of glistening. I don't know what's the upper part of the chest cord. I don't know. It's because it's not lascivious. It's not like overly objectification. It's not overly sexualized. It's not kind of for gratification. But there's a lot of Ashley Judd and Sandra Bullock with sweaty.
Their
Ashley Judd.
clavicles.
Above breasts. Yeah.
Their clavicles are sweating in the little creases up here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get it. It's true.
Yeah.
That's real.
Fair.
But also that makes tempers more fractured and all the rest.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe that plays into some of these tensions.
Yeah. Anyway.
Great. Thank you for answering that burning question.
Yeah. Literally. It's burning.
So McConaughey did win an MTV Movie Award. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know if you didn't read that yourself. For
The
best
most
straight
prestigious
through
of all the
performance.
awards.
Yeah, I remember them though. They were a little popcorn bucket, right? A little gold.
I think they still are. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And Grisham approved of his performance more than the movie. Actually, I don't know if you've read the same quote, because he said, "When all was said and done, I was happy with it. Happy we're able to find a kid like Matthew. It wasn't a great movie, but it was a good one." So I think he kind of looks on it a decent adaptation, but I'm glad, as we've been saying all the way through, McConaughey got to bring that character of Jake to life.
Yeah. Good for him.
Yeah. I'd go with it being a good movie, not a great movie, but definitely a great performance.
Yeah, nice. I like that.
And an important film to see.
Yeah, considering all the context you've given us in this conversation, I think definitely it's certainly changed my perspective on some of the thoughts I'd had coming into this conversation, like knowing the truth of it. And that big burning one was that idea of it, does the time matter? Does the date when this is set matter? But yeah, it really, really does.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. They wanted to think that the past was behind them, but it turned out it wasn't.
It still is.
Yeah. All right, Brill, fancy a little bit of green lights before we start to wrap up?
Yeah.
So
Are you doing the accent?
Definitely not for everyone's best interests, I think. The all right was about as good as it gets from the start, I'm afraid. We've touched upon quite a few of the things that he writes about in this, which is interesting about the casting process and how he wanted the role. And as you said, Amber, they kind of laughed him out the room. And Woody Harrelson was the main guy for a while, but then I'm sure you read the same thing, or you might have heard the rumors about Grisham nixed him because of his role in Natural Born Killers. And sadly, a copycat murderer from Natural Born Killers had killed somebody that John Grisham knew. So he was like, there's no way that guy's playing my Jake in my movie. Yeah. And then, of course, yeah, you're right. Matthew got the call. So a lot of that's in here, which is really interesting. And then he kind of jumped to the release and the impact that had on him. So I thought I might share a little bit of that.
Yeah, please do.
The day of the opening of A Time to Kill, I strolled to my favorite deli on the 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica, California, to get a tuna fish sandwich on toasted sourdough with extra pickles and ketchup on the side. clearly an important date because we're remembering all that detail.
Mm.
It was like any other stroll down the promenade for me. 400 or so people milling about. 396 made nothing of me. 4 did. A few girls who thought I was cute, and one dude who likes my shoes. That night, A Time to Kill premiered in theatres across America and grossed $15 million in its opening weekend, a box office hit in 1996. The following Monday, I went back to the promenade to get another tuna fish sandwich on toasted sourdough with extra pickles and ketchup on the side. It was not like any other stroll down the promenade for me. 400 or so people milling about. 396 stared at me. 4 did not. 3 babies and a blind man. I checked my fly and lightly thumbed my nose to see if I had a booger hanging out. I didn't. What the fuck? I was famous. So, yeah, he really felt, this is the moment, isn't it? We've touched upon it a lot here tonight. This is it. Like, kind of, now my life has changed.
Yeah. It's a big moment for him. That's so cute. I hadn't actually read that.
I think it's interesting as well. I mean, it was number 1 in the box office in the US for 2 weeks running. And, we think it's a modest budget. This is, Grisham's first book. He's not a big name. He's a growing name in the book world, but maybe not in the film world. Can you think of another $40 million film like this that would get to number 1 and then stay there 2 weeks in a row? It doesn't happen that often anymore.
No, never now, I would say, actually.
So, yeah, like Juror number 2 getting thrown straight to streaming just shows us that they wouldn't do the same again. And that had big names. So, and a massively respected director. So I think McConaughey being able to anecdotally see the difference that everyone was seeing this film, talking about this film, recognizing him, it shows Warner Brothers put the effort into promoting it as well. And it also just makes me still wonder why that couldn't be capitalized upon even more for his career following. So I'm fascinated to listen to your next few episodes and see what happens with his career next.
Yeah, thanks. I was watching the trailer for his next appearance last night, and he's not in it. So yeah, it's interesting. He can't even make it in the trailer for his next movie, which, maybe was filmed before this came out and he started to get the acclaim, but it's almost like another backward step when really he should be taking a giant leap, 100%.
Yeah.
All right, last but not least, if you don't mind, I've got a couple of reviews because that's my little habit to share a couple of reviews from Letterboxd, which, Tim, you and I, after this, totally need to be swapping our Letterboxd IDs.
We'll do that.
Okay, Lauren says, this movie wishes it was To Kill a Mockingbird. However, it did have 2 great things. A really well-written monologue about institutionalized and ingrained racism and Matthew McConaughey. So how do we feel? Lauren's not a big fan.
Oh, Lauren, I hear you about the 2 things that she liked that were right. I disagree a little bit with Lauren.
Yeah, we have to correctively review this.
I don't know. I thought it was a classic.
But we don't know Lauren's background. So Lauren,
no,
fair enough. And at least you like McConaughey.
That's true. I mean, I pondered over that one for a while because I wondered what she meant by the monologue, whether she meant McConaughey's, but I don't think she does. I think she probably means Haley's, right, in the prison to Jake.
Yeah, I think so.
Which is another really powerful moment in the film. So she's right to call that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if you ask Samuel L. Jackson to his face, he'll tell you that it wasn't what he wanted it to be. So
yeah,
maybe these are, again, perspectives that we
don't know.
Yeah, we've got too much distance from.
Okay, one more. Charlie. He says, no matter how many times I watch this movie, and there's been a good few, this film continues to draw me in every time. The story is raw, no holds barred, and very engaging. The cast is top notch, and the performances, especially McConaughey, are awards worthy. It's not perfect, but this is a great way to spend 2+ gripping hours.
Yeah, Charlie.
Yeah, would you agree with Charlie?
I agree with Charlie because he hit the nail on the head that it's not perfect. I mean, it would be hard to make this a perfect film because the book probably does it so much better. But
also not perfect. Yeah.
They did great. I really think this is a great film. Yeah.
And it is 2.5, but it doesn't feel long. It doesn't feel like
No.
a 2.5 hour movie at all.
No.
I watched it twice this week,
Mhm.
so no, it's not over long.
Mm.
It moves along at the right pace.
Mhm.
I feel like you could have put more in this, but then it is getting too long. Whereas 2.5 hours, it's about right for this.
Yeah.
You've got to tell this story fully, and there are so many parts to it. So I think Charlie's right.
Good old Charlie. All right, the time has come for you both to give your final verdict then. So within McConaughey's career, so I mean, we can consider it as being a good but not great movie. It's got some faults, it's not perfect, but it's, but for McConaughey himself, at this point, I think I might know where this is going to go. But no, I'll ask the question anyway. This is movie number 9 for him. And as you said, Tim and Amber, and you've been looking as well and considering his filmography and career, bitty up until this point. Is this one of his that we should consider a classic? We definitely have to watch it. Is it one that's worth catching? Or is it one that's we should avoid and it's only for completists only?
Okay. I am going to say, because I've watched, we looked through this earlier. We've watched 20 of his, I don't know, feature films.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say it was definitely top 3. So this is a classic for me.
Nice. Okay. I like that. 20 is a good number. That's an impressive number because he's got about 52. Yeah. So that's a good stat. You've hit about half the McConaughey movies.
And I think it inspires me to watch some more of his films. And you have too. I've been listening to the podcast and going, I've never heard of this film before. It doesn't sound great, but I'm now intrigued. So I think for me, this is under those categorizations, this is a classic for McConaughey. It's not a classic in the pantheon of cinema, but in his filmography, absolutely, because this is where his career is defined.
Yeah.
If this was where his career started, fair enough. You've started far back, you've gone into the weeds, but this is really where his being a leading man starts. And as such, I think you've got to see it to see what potential he had early on.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way that you've both put that. And, it's a welcome relief considering some of the absolute drivel I've had to watch recently. And I've only done it to myself, like this is my project. But yeah, this felt like I've arrived. I've arrived where I want to be in this project, watching McConaughey in movies where he is a star. Yeah, absolutely.
Your head is now above water. You
yeah.
now.
Yeah, things are looking up.
Absolutely, yeah. From as you said, Tim, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. From some of the ones that he's done previously, there wasn't any further down to go.
Yikes. But does this warm you to him a bit more as well? Because up until this point, were you starting to feel like, if it's all like this, what have I done to myself?
Yeah, I guess knowing what's coming. If I had no experience for any of those late movies, then yes, definitely. I mean, when I first envisioned this project, the person that was in my head the most was Jean-Claude Van Damme, because I was such a fan growing up. Wow. And I was like, God, I loved all those old Van Damme movies. I want to go back and watch them all. And then when I looked at his filmography and I thought, oh yeah, there's about 8 good ones that I clearly just watched over and over and over as a kid. And then for 20 years, it's an absolute bucket of shite. I was like, I can't do that to myself. Like, why would I? So yeah, there is a little bit of that feeling across a few of these here because there's some pretty bad movies, and he's never been bad in them. It's just he's not really been in them. So yeah, it's a time to kick on, which is it's just nice for me knowing what I've got coming up. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Nice.
What have you two got coming up though? Because you have your own podcast that we need to talk about.
We do. I don't. Okay, here's the thing. I plan nothing,
and I try and plan something.
So somewhere in the middle, we meet and are like, "Yeah, let's talk about these 3 or 4 films." So
our latest episode was our review of 2024, where we realized that despite loving each other very much and agreeing on most things, we had wildly different lists of best and worst films. In fact, actually, we agreed almost completely on the worst films. We had very different lists for the best films. And one film that was on my worst was on Amber's best. So, it wasn't enough to cause an argument, but that was fascinating. So I think what we've got next is we like to look at the award season, and we
Great.
try to keep up to date with some of the award contenders, many of which have already been really good.
Yeah.
So as often as we can, we'll try and review those.
Yeah, we're deep. We're deep in the middle of like trying to watch a lot of the Oscar nominees or what we might think would be nominated because they're not out yet. And then we'll start to shortlist. And anyway, so we're kind of deep in the middle of watching it, and then we will go and record. So
and for people like us and yourself, and probably a lot of your listeners as well, we're the kind of people that people come to and say, well, what films are good? Because you're into films. Go on, what's good? What's there good to watch? And if they ask us what's going to win Oscars, we want to say from actual knowledge rather than just from what we've read or heard. Yeah. So if we can, we'll try and watch. We don't force ourselves to watch the things we don't like the sound of, but anything else, we'll give it a go. And sometimes we find some surprises. So listeners to our podcast will find some surprises along with us.
Yeah.
What's the leading contenders so far? What have you been, a little sneak peek? What have you both enjoyed the most, or independently have you enjoyed of the potential contenders?
Sing Sing is definitely at the top of my list for this Oscar season, I think.
Yeah. We had personal connection to that a little bit that really made it hit home really well. Yeah. And we talked about that a little bit.
My father's in prison, so it kind of hits home there too. It's an excellent film. It's highly recommend that film. It's just so incredible.
And then one of our latest ones was A Real Pain that we watched. And that was, when we talk about an actor making their appearance on screen and making you go, okay, this is someone I need to watch. Kieran Culkin in that film is quite special. The performance he gives is just so raw and so enigmatic. And a load of people know this already from his previous roles, but this is the point where you go, okay, he's now saying I've arrived. So it's going to be an interesting award season, and hopefully both of those films do well. We'll find out.
A Real Pain was definitely a surprise for me. I didn't think I was going to like it, but I loved it. So that's another big one to watch. Yeah.
Fascinating. To promote a podcast that needs no promotion, he was on Smartless recently, and he was excellent on that. Actually, he came across really, really erudite and clever, and he's had a long career, right? He knows what he's doing, but the way he's navigated that and managed that from being a child star to, I'm mad to say he's arrived now, isn't it? When he's been acting for 40 something years, but it was fascinating hearing him talk about that.
And I think he's taken a page out of McConaughey's book here, where he's now said, okay, give me the good roles. I've proven I can do it. I've come from the child actor route. I've done all these things that you don't care about. Now give me the good stuff. And so this film makes the point that whatever comes next is going to have to be as good, if not better.
Yeah.
So
love that.
That's going to be interesting to see.
Amazing. Thanks so much. Am I allowed to have a patented Amber goodbye for the end of the show, or is that exclusively to your own podcast?
Oh, no, I don't mind. Wait, what?
The way that you always end our podcast?
Oh.
Yeah. It's such a nice, warm ending.
Oh, that's so sweet. Well, yeah, I don't mind. So you want me to end it just...
Of course, please do.
Okay. All right. Well, this has been Jack, Tim, and Amber, and I hope you all come back now. You hear?
Wonderful. Thank you both. All right. All that's left for me to say is another big thank you to everyone that is listening and partaking in this journey with me through the reconnaissance. That was A Time to Kill. Next up in a fortnight, I'm joined by the 20th Century Geek Scott Weatherly to discuss Eminem's supporting performance as Tip Tucker in Bill Murray's buddy road trip comedy alongside An Elephant. Yes, you heard that right. In larger than life for those that are watching along. Until next time, be excellent to each other and make sure you take the time to treat yourself too. I am Jack signing off. Yippee-ki-yay, movie lovers.
cut.
Oh, sorry.
After she'd done it 3 times for our podcast, we then realized we had to keep it
It
going.
kind of just became a thing.
Again, we don't plan.
It's part of your charm. That's your charm.